You were never supposed to hear this. Not from me. Not from anyone. But now that you're here, it's already too late. They say the Blackwood case was sealed in 1878. That no trace remains in the medical records. That the Methodist Church burned the only surviving journals. But the real beginning was not Kansas. It was not 1878. It was Ravenshade, 1861. And what happened there was no disease. It was a transaction. 4 brothers. Born in the dead center of a century no one understood. Raised on cursed land. And touched by something that man was never meant to know. Something so precise, so unrelenting, so intelligent in its corruption that even now, 160 years later, the descendants of the town's survivors refuse to speak their names aloud. The world remembers the Civil War. But history forgot what crawled through the cornfields of Ravenshade while men died for flags and causes. The Blackwood farm was not a battlefield in the conventional sense. No bullets, no sabers, only strange hymns echoing from the chapel, livestock that gave birth to deformed things with human eyes, and townsfolk who vanished without record, explanation, or trace. One by one, each brother was called, or so the journals say, not to fight, not to farm, but to receive. Receive what? That is the question they buried under 100 layers of state secrets, ecclesiastical erasures, and academic cowardice. But the symptoms were not of fever. The symptoms were not of plague. They were architectural, shifts in symmetry, enhancements in language and tone, inexplicable musical intervals in their voices, and eventually shadows that no longer obeyed the laws of light. The official report claimed it was typhoid. The autopsies never released. The attending physicians? Dead within a month. One left a single phrase in his blood-soaked notebook. They were no longer bound by bone. And now you've heard it. The fracture. The forbidden fracture in American history they never wanted you to trace. We begin in Ravenshade, 1861. The fog never lifted that summer, and the crows never stopped circling the chapel roof. This is not folklore. This is not myth. This is transformation. And what follows will change the way you see everything you've ever called human. The town of Ravenshade was never on any official map. It was a hamlet stitched together by whispers and wet soil. Just 19 families living between the edge of the Ebonwood Forest and the banks of the Blackvale River. It was land no settler claimed twice. Crops grew fast, yes, but too fast. Cornstalks taller than houses. Wheat that bled black when split. Even the bees flew strangely here, drunk on nectar that glowed faintly after dark. The Blackwood family arrived in spring of 1857. For brothers and their father, Henry Blackwood, a fire and brimstone preacher from New York who had allegedly been excommunicated from 2 separate churches for heresies, best left unrecorded. He came with a heavy Bible, hand-bound in human skin, or so the rumors went, and eyes that never blinked during sermons. A man obsessed not with salvation, but with ascension. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel, the sons. They did not speak to the townsfolk. They did not drink with the men or visit the market. But they worked, tirelessly, as if something were always watching. As if every moment of delay might bring divine punishment. Ezra, the eldest, could move stone like it weighed nothing. Caleb calculated celestial patterns on the back of cattle receipts. Josiah quoted scripture in Aramaic. And Abel just stared into the woods, muttering prayers that didn't match any known Bible. One woman swore she heard him singing in reverse. They built their homestead with perfect geometry, each corner aligned to astronomical bodies. No nails, only interlocking timber, soaked in red oil. They called it the frame. But it was the structure on the hill behind the house that turned whispers into warnings. A chapel, octagonal in shape, with no cross, no steeple, and no entrance for the living. No one saw them build it. One day it simply existed. By the second harvest, the townspeople began finding animals without skin, arranged in symbols, spirals, circles with eyes, no tracks, no blood trail. Just offerings left in the fields like warnings. The sheriff confronted Henry Blackwood. The next day he was gone. No one ever found his body. only his badge, placed gently on the chapel's black stone threshold. That winter, the brothers never aged. Their hair darkened. Their voices deepened. They did not bury their father. They entombed him beneath the floor of the chapel. And from that moment forward, something began. The chapel did not echo. That was the first thing outsiders noticed if they were ever allowed inside. Voices would simply stop. No resonance, no reflection. As if the building drank sound. The interior walls, though made of stone, felt warm to the touch. Josiah once claimed they breathed with the spirit. But those who entered said it felt more like standing in the lungs of something vast and unseen, something old. The altar had no cross. Only a single phrase carved in bloodstone. Ascension begins with surrender. The town's pastor, Reverend Elijah Murrin, tried to intervene. He rode up to the Blackwood property on Pentecost Sunday, armed with his King James Bible and a voice sharpened by 20 years of preaching. He never made it past the fence. According to a witness, a teenage boy hiding in the trees, Reverend Murrin stepped onto the property and simply stopped, froze in place like a statue. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. And then he turned around, walked back to his horse, and rode into the Ebonwood forest. He was never seen again. That night, the Blackwood Chapel rang for the first time. There was no bell inside. After that, Ravenshade changed. Children began waking in the night, describing the same dream. A staircase beneath the ground, voices whispering through dirt, and 4 tall men whose shadows moved before them. One boy claimed he spoke to Josiah in his dream. Said the brother told him, "We're almost ready. You'll be made new." The boy went blind the next morning. No medical explanation. Animals avoided the property completely. Horses refused to pass the eastern fence line. Dogs howled at the wind when it blew from the direction of the farm. Birds dropped dead mid-flight above it. But the crops flourished. As the rest of Ravenshade suffered from a sudden and unexplained drought, the Blackwood land turned gold. Their wheat fields grew so thick they had to harvest 3 times a season. Every stalk perfect, no rot, no pests. When townsfolk came to ask how, Caleb offered them grain. Only one man accepted. He died 5 days later, clawing at his own throat and mumbling in a language his wife said sounded like a sermon made backward. And still, no one stopped them, because no one could explain them, and because everyone in Ravenshade was starting to dream the same dream. You ever seen a man smile while his bones break? Because that's what the doctor said happened next. Autumn arrived in Ravenshade like a wound that wouldn't close. The Blackwood brothers stopped appearing in town altogether. Their supply trips ended. Their field harvested themselves, or so the rumors went. Some swore they saw movement in the wheat at night. Not wind, not animal. Movement that stopped when you looked directly at it, like it knew you were watching. Then the sounds began. First, the low vibrations, barely audible like a cello string plucked beneath the ground. Then came the harmonics, high-pitched frequencies that set dogs barking and knocked pictures from the walls of nearby homes. Finally came the voices. Not 1, not 4, thousands, whispering from beneath the Blackwood land. The first to investigate was Dr. Emery Caldwell, a traveling physician from Virginia. He'd come through Ravenshade with a cart full of tinctures and a healthy skepticism for backwater superstition. When he heard the talk of singing ground and angelic brothers, he requested permission to meet them. Ezra agreed. He was never seen again. Not whole. 6 days later, his horse wandered back into town alone, pulling a cart. Inside were 4 items. A cracked medical bag, a bloodstained journal, a jar of gold flakes suspended in fluid, and a note, unsigned. He was given a gift, but his frame broke under the weight. The journal, confiscated and hidden by the town's council, contained only 1 entry worth reading. Their bones are not bones anymore. Their blood hums when you're near them. Josiah's pupils have vanished, but he sees more than I do. Ezra's breath smells of iron and lightning. I asked if they still felt pain. Ezra smiled. Not as you understand it, he said. Then he bent his own wrist backward until it snapped. And he kept smiling. What was happening on that farm was no illness. No religious delusion. It was something else entirely. A reconfiguration. A biology. Of spirit. of purpose. And though Ravenshade kept pretending it was just a quiet farm on the edge of the woods, they all felt it now. Something had taken root, and it wasn't from this world. Beneath the chapel, there were stairs. No one ever saw them built. There were no blueprints, no shovels, no signs of excavation. But every brother knew they were there. One spiral staircase, carved into obsidian stone that had never been found in Kansas, or anywhere in the region, for that matter. Josiah called it the mouth of God. Abel called it the way down. And it was down, far down, too far. By 1861, the chapel no longer hosted prayer in the traditional sense. The hymns had changed, shifted in tone and structure. Musical experts who later analyzed transcriptions would claim the notes matched no known Western scale. They mimicked harmonic sequences found in deep-sea whale calls, seismic vibrations, and in one disturbing case, radio signals recorded from deep space in the 1970s. But those came over a century later, and the Blackwoods had written them down in 1859. The chapel no longer accepted visitors, but the sounds began seeping through the ground, and the dreams returned, stronger now. Children drawing spirals, men waking with nosebleeds and dirt under their fingernails. A teacher slit her wrists in front of her students, whispering, "They're almost complete." Then one night, the light came. People across Ravenshade described it as a column of white gold fire erupting from the chapel roof, soundless and unnatural. No smoke, no heat, just brilliance. It lasted less than a minute, but crops blackened instantly within 100 yards of the farm. Pregnant livestock miscarried, and two men, who had ventured toward the hill in curiosity, were found unconscious, bleeding from the eyes, hands fused into fists. The mayor ordered the Blackwood property sealed. But by then, it didn't matter. They had already gone underground. A man named Elias Quinn, a grave robber turned reluctant investigator, would later sneak onto the property under cover of fog. What he found was more than forbidden. It was impossible. The chapel's floor had opened like a mouth. Beneath it, stone steps, perfectly smooth, spiraling into blackness, and carved along the walls, symbols not from Hebrew, Greek, or Latin, but something older. He didn't descend. He couldn't, because standing at the top of those stairs was Abel, eyes glowing like twin lanterns, and smiling. "Brother," he said, "you're not ready for what's waiting at the bottom." 3 nights after Elias Quinn fled the chapel, something emerged from the soil. Not a man, not a creature, a structure. It wasn't there before. Of that the townspeople were certain. It rose from the Blackwood property like a black tooth, 20 feet tall, seamless, obsidian, octagonal like the chapel. No door, no window, no purpose. They called it the monolith, and even the birds stopped flying over it. Those who approached it reported hearing whispers, not external, but internal. Thoughts that weren't theirs. Phrases that didn't belong in their minds. One farmer, Henry Lawton, reached out to touch the surface. His hand blistered immediately, skin peeling away like paper. His final words before falling into a coma were, "There's something beneath the monolith. Something breathing." The town was coming undone. Wives were finding their husbands standing in fields at night, mouths open, murmuring equations. Children were drawing images of the 4 brothers, but with no faces, just hollow spaces where eyes and mouths should be. And worst of all, the soil was changing. In areas closest to the Blackwood land, the dirt turned deep red. Not blood, not clay, something in between. It smelled metallic, sweet, like rot and perfume. Then the letters arrived. Identical envelopes. No stamps. No handwriting. Delivered to each household on the same night. Inside, a single line. "Your bodies are not yet worthy, but your minds may serve." The mayor tried to burn his. His house caught fire within an hour. No cause was ever found. Those who left Ravenshade did not get far. Horses died on the road. Carriages overturned in clear weather. Some walked into the woods and were never seen again. One woman made it to the next town over. She burst into flames on the church steps. No one could explain it. The sheriff finally sent 6 men to confront the Blackwood property. Armed, angry, determined. Only one came back. He was naked, hairless, tongue cut out, and carved across his chest, in perfect symmetry, were 4 symbols, each matching the birthmark of one Blackwood brother. No one questioned the message. The farm was no longer a farm. It was a vessel, a transmitter, and something was listening. The first man to return from beneath the chapel was not a Blackwood. His name was Dr. Nathaniel Greaves, a geologist with no ties to Ravenshade. The government had sent him, quietly. No records, no announcement. Just one man, a journal, and a task. Determine if the seismic anomalies coming from the area were natural or was something else. He arrived in September of 1861. By October, he was missing. By November, he walked back into town, but not as himself. Dr. Greaves was blind, not from injury. His eyes were intact, but from something deeper. His pupils were white. His breathing, shallow, constant, like he was counting. He was found standing in the middle of the town square at midnight, barefoot and humming. When questioned, he answered only once. There's no end. The stairs are infinite. But I saw them. The 4 brothers are not men anymore. He died 3 days later. No struggle. No trauma. His heart simply stopped. In his room, investigators found torn pages stuffed under the bed, frantic notes scrawled in charcoal and blood. Here's what they said. The stone is not of earth. The air grows warmer the farther down you go, but the flame doesn't burn. I passed rooms, empty but not silent. I heard them singing, not with mouths, with marrow. There's a machine beneath the chapel, living, breathing, waiting. I saw something in the dark. I think it was Ezra, but his hands were backwards. After his death, the chapel sealed itself. Literally, the doorway collapsed inward, bricks folding like paper. Witnesses described a sound like bones clicking in rhythm. When locals tried to dig around it, the earth swallowed their tools. Metal rusted overnight. Wood cracked. And always, the dreams returned. One boy was found sleepwalking toward the monolith, whispering, I will not ascend unbroken. Something was changing in the minds of the people. Language twisted. Time felt unstable. One man claimed he watched the sun set and rise 3 times in a minute. Others experienced shared dreams, vivid, exact, terrifying. And beneath it all, the humming never stopped. It was alive. It had always been alive. And the 4 brothers were now its voice. They were never born, not in the way humans understand it. That's the conclusion Father Silas Morrow reached in the final months before the parish collapsed. Father Silas was no stranger to darkness. A war chaplain turned exorcist, he had seen things most priests would call blasphemy to repeat. He came to Ravenshade by request, called not by the diocese, but by the whispers of something he claimed traveled through prayer. He arrived unannounced in winter, robed and weathered, and walked straight to the chapel ruins. He stood before the sealed arch and placed both hands on the stone. He wept. They were summoned, he said later, not delivered. They were invited into this world, and the invitation came from below. What he meant became clearer after townsfolk uncovered a fragment buried in the oldest part of the Blackwood farm, a stone slab etched in symbols so ancient they matched no known language. It pulsed faintly. When brought near fire, the flames bent toward it. Inscribed in Latin on the back, someone had carved a chilling phrase. They were not conceived. They were called. Father Silas translated the markings. They told of an offering, a womb of stone, and a covenant sealed in bone. He believed the Blackwood family line had been selected, generation upon generation, to act as gatekeepers to something ancient. Not demons, not angels, architects, the kind that design reality. Not with blueprints, but with blood and time. He claimed the 4 brothers were the final stage of a centuries-old ritual, that their birth was not a beginning, but a conclusion, a culmination. The human shape, he said, is just a costume. They were born wearing it. But what lies underneath is architecture. After speaking those words, Father Silas isolated himself in the old schoolhouse. He covered every inch of the walls with protective sigils, starved himself for clarity, and began writing what he called the manual for reversal. It was 127 pages. He finished only 6 before he slit his throat in a circle of ash. His final words, scrawled in red chalk across the ceiling. Do not open the pit. Their time has not yet come. But in Ravenshade, time had already begun to bend. And the pit? It was waking. There was a journal buried beneath the blackwood hearth, wrapped in animal skin, bound with a cord braided from human hair. It belonged to Naomi Blackwood, the boy's mother. No one knew she kept a diary. She was always quiet, distant, often seen at the edge of the fields at dawn, standing motionless, barefoot, eyes closed. Some said she was praying. Others believed she was listening. Inside the journal, everything changed. The entries began like any pioneer mother's words: weather, harvest, fever. But soon the ink darkened. Her tone shifted. She started referring to her unborn sons not as children, but as conduits. The first kicks came too early. Not in the womb, under the bed. I saw the floorboards ripple. I hear them, in the soil, singing to me through roots. Ezra will be the mouth. Josiah the mind. Abel the flame. Caleb is the door. She never described the births in physical detail. Only motion, terror, awe, an unnatural silence. There was no midwife, no doctor, just her, and a knife passed down through the Blackwood line for 9 generations. A knife she called the key. Then, the most disturbing entry. They came out with their eyes open. All 4. Not crying. Watching. She claimed she did not feed them. That something else did. Each night, they hum. The milk in the jar curdles. The soil in the windowsill rises like breath. I see the walls pulse. And then a confession. I was never their mother. I was the altar. My body was the offering. They chose me when I was 7. In the orchard, I heard them in the trees. It explained everything. The whispers. The anomalies. The reason no doctor could explain the brothers' perfect health or their unearthly calm. Naomi died before any of this could be shared. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, her body was found under the chapel, though no one had ever seen her go inside. She was buried without ceremony. But that journal, the town sheriff locked it away in the courthouse. And one night later, the building burned to the ground. Nothing survived, except the knife. It was untouched by flame, carved into its blade in tiny surgical script. You do not kill what was never born. The changes began with Ezra. He was always the quietest, the one who stared too long, who blinked too little. Villagers claimed that when Ezra looked at you, it wasn't like being seen, it was like being scanned. As if your name, your memories, your blood were being measured for something you couldn't understand. In October, the butcher's wife went missing. Her name was Marion Whitlow. Sweet woman. Church every Sunday. She was last seen walking near the Blackwood orchard, basket in hand, humming a hymn. 3 days later, she came back. But not right. She didn't speak, didn't blink. Her mouth hung slightly open, and she walked as though her bones were too light for her skin. When her husband embraced her, she whispered a single word into his ear before collapsing. Ezra. They say she aged 30 years in one night. Her hair went white. Her fingers curled inwards like dry branches. Her eyes leaked something that was not tears, something black, thick, and warm. And still, Ezra sat at the edge of the farm, cross-legged, carving perfect circles into the dirt with one long, uncut fingernail. Next came Josiah. A schoolteacher tried to quiz him, innocent questions. Spelling. Arithmetic. Josiah answered every question before it was asked. He began drawing symbols in class. Not childish scribbles. Geometric patterns so complex that local masons and architects couldn't replicate them. When asked what they were, he said, "They're not for buildings. They're buildings." He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He stared into corners and whispered things under his breath. Things no one could quite hear, but left anyone nearby with bloody noses and splitting headaches. Then Abel, the third brother, was caught in the barn, with fire dancing on his fingertips. Not burning him, obeying him. He didn't flinch. He smiled. By now, the town knew something unnatural was unfolding, but it was Caleb that truly broke them. He vanished for 3 days. When he returned, he wasn't walking. He was floating, inches above the ground, limbs limp, eyes glowing like coal in moonlight. Every dog in Ravenshade howled that night. Every clock stopped at midnight. And for 7 minutes, the sky above the Blackwood farm pulsed red like a heartbeat. What lived inside the brothers was growing stronger. What waited beneath the earth was awakening. Panic spread like a sickness. By late November, Ravenshade was no longer a town. It was a trapped organism, tightened, feverish, and twitching. People didn't speak to each other unless they had to. Doors were nailed shut. Children stopped laughing. Something in the air made even the innocent feel guilty. That's when the townsmen gathered. It wasn't an official meeting. No one rang the church bell. It just happened, quietly, as if the idea had entered every man's mind at the same hour, the same breath. They lit torches. They brought chains. And they walked, without words, toward the Blackwood farm. It was a full moon, but the light didn't reach the property. The moment they crossed the wooden fence, the torches dimmed, not extinguished, just reduced to embers, flickering like they were struggling to breathe. The farmhouse was silent. No wind, no insects, just that low hum, always that hum, vibrating through the soil. The men entered, one by one. Inside, the walls were lined with salt, the windows blacked out with cloth. In the center of the main room sat a bowl of water, and in it 4 teeth. Human, still warm. Then they found the brothers. Not hiding, not afraid, waiting. Ezra was the first to speak. "You're not too late," he said, voice dry and clear. "But you will be." One man raised his chain. Josiah smiled and stepped forward, reaching out, not with hands, but with thought. The man dropped to his knees, screaming in a voice not his own. One of the others shot Josiah in the chest. He didn't bleed. He laughed. The house responded. Floorboards buckled. The walls pulsed. Symbols began to glow beneath the men's feet, and from the cellar came a sound so deep and ancient it bypassed the ear entirely. It pressed into their minds. 7 men ran. 5 collapsed. 3 went mad. The rest? Never found. The next morning, the farmhouse was empty. No blood. No bodies. Just 4 perfectly arranged chairs, facing the hearth, each one with a single child's tooth resting on the seat. Ravenshade was no longer a town with a secret. It had become the secret. And the brothers? They were no longer boys. They were becoming blueprints. The land began to forget. Maps changed. Slowly, then all at once. First, it was a cartographer in Boston. He insisted that the valley where Ravenshade stood did not, and never had existed. The river was still there. The surrounding towns remained. But the name? Wiped. The coordinates? Missing. The elevation? Inverted like a dent in memory. Then it happened in the post office. Letters addressed to Ravenshade were returned stamped. No such place. Even the telegraph wires buzzed differently when messages tried to pass through the region. They snapped. Glitched. One operator claimed he heard a voice come through instead of static. Stop naming what is shedding its skin. Local farmers began forgetting where their own barns were. Children couldn't remember the names of their siblings. Horses refused to approach the dirt road leading to the Blackwood property, veering violently, bucking, biting. And yet, the brothers thrived. They no longer walked the fields. They glided just above them, never disturbing grass or dust. Their shadows stretched in the wrong direction. Some townsfolk claimed they could see the outline of something vast and ancient moving just beneath the soil wherever the brothers passed. When a group of clergy from St. Augustine's tried to bless the area, their horses collapsed one by one as they approached. Birds fell from the sky mid-flight, and one priest, Father Harlan, was found writing furiously in the mud with his bare fingers. This is not land. This is a mouth. He died with his hands still moving. Even in death, he wrote. Meanwhile, the sheriff tried to hold on. He gathered the last few sane townsfolk, those who hadn't fled or gone catatonic, and built a barrier around the town. Salt, iron, fire, anything to keep the rot in, but it was too late. The rot was not spreading from Ravenshade. It was spreading to it, from somewhere deeper. Something had decided this was the place. Not for a haunting, not for revenge, but for arrival. And the 4 brothers were no longer vessels. They were invitations. Beneath the old chapel was a staircase no one remembered building. Not carved by tools, not laid with stone. It simply existed, as if the earth had peeled back its skin to reveal something older, something that had been waiting. It was found by Clara Morrow, a schoolteacher who refused to leave Ravenshade, claiming her purpose had not yet been fulfilled. She spoke in riddles after that, writing lines of scripture that didn't exist in any Bible. But one day, she vanished from her home. They found her dress folded at the church altar, still warm, still damp with sweat. Under the floorboards, a trapdoor. Beneath it, the stairs. They spiraled downward, impossibly deep, far beyond the foundations of the chapel, far below the water table. There was no moisture, no mold, just a cold, bone-dry silence. Each step hummed when touched. One brave man descended. Jacob Langford, a gravedigger with no family and nothing to lose. He tied a rope to his waist, handed the end to the sheriff, and whispered, "If I jerk once, pull me up. If I jerk twice, run." He never jerked. He never came back. What returned was the rope, charred black, wet with something that hissed in the sun. The sheriff sealed the door with holy oil, burned the chapel, but the fire wouldn't catch. The wood refused to burn. Instead, it breathed, in and out, as if alive. That night, every mirror in Ravenshade cracked from the inside. The townsfolk who remained dreamed the same dream. A great, rotting mouth yawning open beneath their feet, and a voice whispering from the deep. "You dug the hole. We made the stairs." And in that dream, the four brothers stood at the edge of the spiral, holding hands, staring down. Not afraid, but eager. Not resisting, but returning. Because what lay beneath was not hell. It was before hell, older than sin, deeper than death. It had been whispering to the bloodline long before Naomi Blackwood was born. Long before Ravenshade had a name. What had been unleashed was not just ancient. It was remembering itself. Time began to bend. Old photographs of Ravenshade began changing. Family portraits once hung in pristine condition were now burned at the edges, faces blurred, eyes scratched out as if by some unseen hand. Church records altered themselves. Birth certificates showed names that had never existed. The Blackwood boys were now listed as deceased at birth, each one. Yet there they stood, alive, breathing, walking the edge of something no living thing should walk. Even the town's founding year began to shift. First it was 1810, then 1792, then suddenly 1666, written in ash on the old mayor's door. No one knew who had written it, but the message beneath was worse. It was never founded. It was planted. In a local schoolhouse, the children's handwriting changed overnight. All of them, simultaneously, began drawing spirals. Over and over, pages filled with circles within circles, bleeding through paper, ink dripping down their desks like oil. One child spoke a phrase in a dead language, a language no one had ever taught. A language that matched the inscriptions found carved into the underside of the chapel stairs. Doctors were called in. One physician, Dr. Eberly from New York, came with skepticism and science. He left sobbing, eyes blind, muttering the same phrase over and over. "It's not four boys. It's one thing wearing four masks." The town historian, Mrs. Thelma Gray, began burning her own archives. She claimed the more she read, the less she remembered. She screamed that Ravenshade had no founding documents, only invitations. She found letters written before her grandparents were born, all signed by Naomi Blackwood. But in each letter, the ink was fresh, still wet, smelling of iron and roses. Then came the thunder. For 13 nights straight, thunder cracked across cloudless skies, but no lightning followed. Just that sound, deep, judging, final. And the ground grew warm, not with fire, but with breath. The soil exhaled. The trees leaned in toward the Blackwood land. And somewhere deep below, that staircase pulsed with life, growing not down, but outward, like a root system, or veins. And the boys? They began to speak in unison now, not in English, but in a tone that made grown men bleed from the ears. The book had no title, bound in flaking black hide. It was found behind the false wall of the Ravenshade Town Library, sealed in iron, drenched in wax, and buried beneath the foundation with a circle of bones surrounding it. No author, no spine text, just a single emblem on the front, a spiral burning inward. Thelma Gray, already half mad from the record she'd burned, was the one who found it. She wasn't looking for truth. She was trying to destroy what remained. But the book called to her, and when she opened it, something happened that should not be possible. The pages kept writing themselves. Each word formed before her eyes. Not ink, but bleeding letters, carving themselves into the page like scars. And every name she read, she recognized. Not from memory, but from dreams. Thelma knew them, knew their secrets, their fates, their sins. And most disturbing of all, the names began to include the unborn. Infants, children not yet conceived, future generations. And beside every name, a single phrase, marked by the 4. The book didn't tell a story. It remembered one. Each page was a correction, rewriting the world, bending reality back towards something ancient and undesired. It described not the history of Ravenshade, but the intention behind it. And in the center of the book, there was a map, but not of the town, of the veins beneath it, not sewer lines, not water routes, veins, pulsing, glowing red in the candlelight, leading from the Blackwood farmhouse to the chapel to the river to the orphanage, and finally back to a place marked with a single word, origin. When Thelma tried to rip the page out, her hands caught fire. She didn't scream. She laughed. And when her neighbors found her, she was standing in the center of her burning house, holding the book to her chest, whispering. They were never born. They were poured. Her mouth was gone. Her eyes were full of spirals. And the book? Untouched by flame. It now sits in the church vault, locked behind 7 seals, but the locks rust faster than they should. The pages twitch when the wind howls. The 4 brothers do not want it hidden. They want it read. It started with silence. The Ravenshade orphanage, nestled at the edge of the northern woods, was known for its stillness. No laughter, no screams, just the occasional creak of boards and the metallic clink of chains, meant for discipline, according to the matron. But in early October, the silence grew heavy. It wasn't peace. It was absence. 18 children. Gone. No sign of struggle. No broken windows. Bed still warm. Toys undisturbed. The only trace left behind were black handprints on the walls, smeared in spirals, each descending toward the basement. The matron, Eleanor Pitch, insisted she'd heard nothing. But when questioned, she could only say, "They were called." They answered. I envy them. She was found the next morning, arms crossed over her chest, lying in the basement doorway with her lips sewn shut. Not with thread, with hair, long, black strands braided tight through her flesh. No one could explain it. Sheriff's deputies who entered the basement came out changed. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. One began gouging spirals into his own chest with a rusted spoon before collapsing in convulsions. The space itself was wrong. The dimensions twisted. You could walk in a straight line and end up back where you started. Candles wouldn't light. Metal corroded instantly. And the deeper you went, the colder it got, but not the cold of winter. The cold of something watching. In the far corner of the lowest chamber, they found a hole, perfectly round, as if carved by a rotating blade. It was only 6 inches wide, but when they dropped the stone in, they heard no echo, no bottom, just breath. And then, the children's voices. Not crying, laughing, soft, rhythmic, in time with something pulsing far below. One priest tried to bless the hole. He aged 30 years in front of them. His teeth turned black. His veins rose like roots against his skin. He whispered. They weren't taken. They were harvested. From that day forward, no one entered the orphanage again. The building still stands, boarded up, rotting from the inside out. But every October 13th, at 3:13 a.m., a lullaby is heard. Always the same. Always soft. Sung by voices that haven't aged in over a century. And above the door, freshly scrawled each year in ash, feed what you birth, or it will birth what it feeds. The Blackwood family estate had many secrets, but none more damning than the original will. For decades, it was believed to have been destroyed in the fire of 1849. But in 1922, During the demolition of an old annex on the property, workers discovered a false wall. Behind it, a wooden chest sealed in wax, wrapped in chains, and branded with a single word carved in reverse. Obey. Inside was the will, not written on paper, not parchment, but skin. Human, stretched and preserved, with a language that no scholar could trace. The symbols resembled letters, but they moved, twisting, shifting, like they were alive. Historians refused to touch it. But one man tried. Professor Alan Draycott of Miskatonic College, a linguist who specialized in forbidden dialects, translated a single line before collapsing. His mouth filled with ash. His eyes turned inward. He wrote one word in blood before losing consciousness. Inheritance. The will didn't describe property. It didn't divide land or wealth. It listed names. 4 names, each marked with a symbol identical to the spiral on the chapel stairs. But these weren't the 4 Blackwood boys we know. These were other names, ancient, unknowable, older than surnames. One was written upside down, one in mirror script, one in a series of claw marks, and one was missing. Where names should have been, there was just a burn mark, seared into the flesh. Underneath the names, a single phrase in red. What the blood accepts, the world must reject. Legal experts called it forgery. The church called it blasphemy. But the people of Ravenshade recognized it for what it was. A contract, not with the law, but with something below the law. A power that predated government, scripture, and science. The Blackwoods hadn't inherited land. They'd inherited a purpose. And the will was not a declaration. It was a warning, one that had been ignored for over a century. Since its discovery, every person who has tried to remove the will from Ravenshade has died within 7 days. Heart attacks, suicides, fires, no exceptions. The skin cannot be burned, cannot be buried. It now sits in a steel box at the Ravenshade Historical Society, locked, sealed, guarded. But every full moon, the box bleeds, and no one has ever been able to clean it. The nursery was always locked, even after the Blackwood births. Even after the boys turned 5, then 10, then 12, it remained sealed. No sunlight touched its curtains. No wind stirred its air. And no one, not family, not staff, not clergy, was allowed inside. No one, except one. Margaret Eloise Wilkes, the town's last midwife. She was 86 when she finally spoke, blind in one eye and nearly deaf. But what she said chilled the room. Because she wasn't called when the boys were born. She was called after, when the 4th child arrived. The others had appeared days earlier, all under mysterious silence. No labor, no blood, just presence. But the 4th? The 4th came in the storm. Thunder cracked the sky open for 9 hours straight. Crows fell from the sky. The river turned black for a full day. And from inside the manor, something screamed. Not a baby, not a mother. Something deep. When Margaret arrived, the Blackwood patriarch stood at the top of the stairs, soaked in rain, barefoot, smiling with red teeth. He handed her a lantern and said only, "It won't need your hands, just your eyes." And he led her to the nursery. The moment she stepped inside, the air dropped 20 degrees. The wallpaper peeled in slow curls. The crib was untouched, but empty. And on the floor were the other 3 boys, kneeling in a perfect triangle, humming in unison. In the center of the room lay the 4th, but not in the way you'd expect. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He was watching her, eyes already open, pitch black. Not the black of darkness, the black of depth, like staring into a well that has no bottom. His skin was pale, his breath absent, but he smiled. And when Margaret moved closer, she noticed the floor beneath him was damp. Not with blood, not with water, with milk. Rotten, curdled milk seeping up through the boards, rising around his body in a perfect circle. Then he spoke. One word. Not English. Not human. Margaret vomited instantly. She said she felt her teeth try to leave her mouth. She left without touching him. And as she closed the door behind her, she heard the voice of the eldest brother whisper from inside. Now the circle is whole. The chapel had no basement. That's what every record claimed. No lower level, no access points, nothing beneath but stone. But in 1893, during a storm that split the altar clean in two. The floor beneath cracked, and something shifted underneath. A priest, Father Elric Marrow, noticed a hollow sound when he walked the aisle days later. And on the third step before the pulpit, he found it. A trapdoor, covered in dust, sealed in wax, edged in carvings no one had ever seen before. He opened it. Beneath was a spiral staircase descending into darkness, colder than winter and soaked in the smell of rust. He went alone. He was gone for 6 days. When he returned, he was barefoot, shivering, clutching a book he wouldn't let go. He couldn't speak, not because he wouldn't, but because his tongue was missing, cleanly sliced with no blood. What he wrote later in shaking hand was this: "It's not a tunnel. It's a throat. The passage beneath the chapel spirals downward, not built, but formed. The walls are neither stone nor dirt. They pulse when touched, soft in places, hard in others. And the deeper one travels, the more it smells like birth, iron, salt, milk, and something ancient." Father Marrow's drawings showed the descent in 13 stages, each one marked with a symbol that matched a mark found on the Blackwood boys' bodies. But the final chamber? That one was different. It wasn't a room. It was a womb. Soft, circular, breathing. And in the center, a basin filled with black fluid. When tested decades later, the fluid was found to contain human DNA, none of it matching any known records. Some strands were older than any on Earth. Suspended in the fluid was a tooth. Too large for a human, too smooth for an animal. And carved on its face, the spiral. The same spiral that marks the birth records. The same one found on the Blackwood will. The same one the children drew before they vanished. The tooth now resides in a lead-lined case at the Ravenshade Museum, but it's never cold. It vibrates faintly, and anyone who stands too close reports the same thing. I felt something behind my eyes. No one has reopened the tunnel since, because Father Marrow's last note was clear. It's still hungry, and it remembers names. Her name was Clara Whitlow, 25 years old, educated in Boston, fluent in Latin, French, and mathematics. A woman of logic, rigid, calm, and utterly unafraid of superstition. She had seen suffering. She had taught orphans, and she volunteered to tutor the Blackwood boys. No one else would. Their original tutor had disappeared, vanished mid-lesson, leaving behind a blood-stained desk and a quill spinning in midair. The replacement, a Jesuit scholar, was found wandering the riverbanks days later, muttering in Aramaic, eyes rolled white, hands burnt black. Clara believed it was hysteria, rural myth, exaggeration. She was wrong. The first day she met the brothers, they said nothing, just stared, all four. Same time, same breath. She made them recite scripture. They spoke it backward, perfectly, without hesitation. When she asked them to write, they each used a different alphabet. One was Egyptian, one was Greek, one was unknown. The youngest didn't use a pen. He bled symbols onto the page from his palm. Clara grew disturbed, but kept going. She assigned them logic problems. They solved them before she finished writing. She gave them puzzles with no answer. They laughed. And on the 7th day, she decided to test them. It was a lesson in rhetoric. She read them a story, an old folk tale about a fisherman and the devil. She asked, what was the moral? The room fell silent. Then the oldest boy spoke. There is no devil, only debt. The second, there is no fisherman, only hunger. The third, there is no sea, only return. The youngest only stared at her. Clara blinked, and in that instant she was gone. No scream, no flash, no wind. Gone. Her chair remained. Her lesson book too. But her voice, her actual voice, still echoed in the room for days, screaming one word over and over. Stop. Witnesses described it as shrill, distorted, like glass breaking in reverse. The walls of the study warped. Paint peeled into spirals. Mirrors cracked without touch. The Blackwood boys sat calmly, smiling. And on Clara's abandoned lesson plan, someone, no one knows who, had written. She opened the question. She became the answer. To this day, her voice returns every April 4th at noon. For exactly 13 seconds. always ending in a whisper that chills every spine that hears it. They know you. Lucinda Blackwood was no stranger to madness. She came from a line of women known for it. Her grandmother spoke to trees, her aunt carved riddles into her own skin, and her mother vanished for 9 months only to return with white hair and a child that never aged. But Lucinda was different. Sharp, composed, magnetic. She married Ambrose Blackwood, not out of love, but out of purpose, a match arranged by a society older than any church, older even than the manor itself. On her wedding night, she was gifted a book, not by her husband, but by a man who had no shadow. Inside, 413 blank pages. But each morning, one page would fill itself. The ink would rise slowly, like steam off wet skin, forming words in a language Lucinda claimed to understand only in dreams. She began to copy the entries in a separate journal. That journal was found years later, hidden behind a loose board in her bedroom. Its final entries tell a story no historian has been able to explain. March 1st. The boys no longer blink. They stare even while sleeping. I think they're reading me. March 3rd. Ambrose dreams of fire. Every night, he screams the name Marith. Says it's a gate. March 6th. They found my mirror broken, but I didn't break it. It refused to reflect me. March 9th. The youngest sang without sound today. The walls wept milk. I think the house is pregnant. March 12th. Page 413 appeared last night. It simply read, "Close the book, or they'll rewrite you." March 13th. She wrote nothing, because that was the day the housekeeper found her in the east corridor. Eyes wide, lips sewn shut, and her hands, each palm punctured with 6 nails, driven clean through the bone and into the floorboards. No blood, no scream, but in her lap was the book. Page 414 now written. In her own handwriting. I couldn't close it. I wanted to, but the words were already inside me. I was the final page. The journal ends there. The original book? Still missing. But locals say sometimes, if you're near the ruins of the Blackwood Nursery at midnight, you'll feel your hands itch, your fingers tremble, and just behind your teeth, you'll taste ink. It was April 29th, 1868. A night now known across Ravenshade folklore as the night without wind. The town clock stopped at 11:06 p.m. Every animal, dogs, birds, cattle, went silent. Not out of fear, but as if commanded. No rustle stirred the trees. No breath moved the grass. It was as though the very air had been removed. And then, one by one, the trees turned. Not fallen, not snapped. Turned. Witnesses swore by it. Every tree in Ravenshade, over 3,000 of them, bowed toward the Blackwood estate. Branches stretching, bending unnaturally, cracking at the root, but never falling. They didn't point toward the manor. They worshipped it. And in the silence, the town changed. Clocks ticked backward. Oil lamps flickered blue. Every reflection, from mirrors to windows to water, froze. Even when people moved, their reflections didn't. It lasted 13 minutes, and then it was gone, but not before something was taken. The census the next morning was short by 81 people. Vanished. No sign of struggle. No footprints. Just empty homes, half-finished meals, and one chilling detail. All the beds were perfectly made, as if no one had ever lived there. Children were the most affected. They woke up screaming, unable to speak for 3 days. One girl etched spirals into her cheeks with her own fingernails. Another, just 7, began drawing the 4 Blackwood boys from memory, despite never having seen them. When asked where she saw them, she simply whispered, "In the sky." They were watching the trees. The town priest, Father Laurel, held an emergency sermon, but he never made it to the pulpit. He was found kneeling on the roof of the chapel, eyes burned out, mouth filled with soil. In his hand was a note. They're not boys. They are doors. Every year since, at precisely 11:06 p.m. on April 29th, the wind dies again. Only for a moment. But in that moment, the trees shift ever so slightly. And if you stand outside Ravenshade Manor, you'll hear it. Quiet. Distant. Just beneath the threshold of human hearing. The sound of breathing. Not many. One. Something enormous. exhaling across the land, patient as death, ancient as silence. Waiting. Dr. Elias Greymark was not a superstitious man. He ran the Ravenshade Asylum from 1854 to 1872, a towering stone complex 5 miles from the Blackwood estate. Unlike other doctors of the time, he rejected exorcisms and leeching, favoring experimental psychiatry. He believed that the mind was a locked door. But by 1867, he changed his mind. Permanently. It began with patient 119, a mute boy found wandering near the Blackwood grounds, covered in soot, eyes wide, humming tunelessly. No name, no history. The boy wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, but every midnight, he'd speak one sentence. Always the same. The fourth brother is hungry. Dr. Greymark thought it a trauma echo. But the more he studied the child, the more impossible things became. Each night, a different staff member would vanish. No sounds, no signs, just one less person, and in their place a black feather, soaked in milk. Desperate, Greymark began a series of audio experiments. He believed the mind could be mapped through sound. He recorded patient 119 during one of his midnight episodes. What he captured broke every phonograph needle in the room. Because it wasn't just speech. It was multiple layers of voices, 4 distinct ones, each speaking in reverse Latin, cuneiform, and something else. Something no language expert could identify. But one mathematician claimed the voice patterns weren't words. They were coordinates. Not for places, but for events. Tragedies. Plagues. Births. Deaths. When Greymark ran the frequencies through a brass sound funnel of his own invention, he heard something else. His own name. Repeated again and again, buried beneath the voices. And then a phrase. We are the key, but you are the lock. 3 days later, Greymark sealed himself in the asylum's morgue. He arranged mirrors in a perfect square, sat naked in the center, injected a full syringe of strychnine. As his body seized, he wrote one final sentence on the floor in his own blood. I have joined the conversation. His body rotted, but his voice didn't. To this day, patients in that wing claim to hear him whispering in their ears, offering riddles, promising knowledge. And those who answer him, those who speak back, are found staring out the window, smiling, always smiling, eyes wide, as if waiting for someone, or something, to speak back. The church arrived late. By the time they acknowledged the Blackwood brothers as a threat, Ravenshade had already changed. Not on the surface. No, the shops still sold bread. The school still rang its bell. But underneath, something ancient had taken root. And the church knew it. They sent not priests, but inquisitors, men trained in rites that had never been canonized, rituals purged from the Vatican's archives. Their leader, Father Aurelian Vex, a defrocked cardinal who claimed to have exorcised entire cities. He brought with him a single weapon, a sealed reliquary, chained in 9 rings of iron. Inside it, the tongue of Saint Idris, a mummified organ believed to silence devils with a single touch. The plan was simple. Enter Ravenshade, burn the manor, use the tongue to silence the boys permanently. But they never made it past the chapel. Ravenshade's central church, St. Elias, had long been abandoned. But when Father Vex arrived, the candles inside were already lit. No doors were broken. No dust covered the pews. Everything was clean, except for the altar. Beneath it, they found a hollow, not carved by hands, but eroded, as if something massive had pulsed against the stone, beating like a heart. Inside, a sphere, bone-white, veined, breathing. The reliquary began to rattle. The tongue of Saint Idris screamed, shriveled to dust, and the iron chains snapped on their own. The altar bled, not symbolically. It poured human blood across the floor, filling the hollow with liquid to the brim. Father Vex turned to flee, but the doors were already gone. Not locked. Gone. The chapel became a box. No windows. No exits. Only the pulsing sphere, which now levitated 3 inches off the floor. Then it split. Not broke, split like a flower or a mouth. What came out was light, but not warm, not bright. It was hungry, the kind of light that searches, finds, and claims. Two of the inquisitors fell to their knees and began laughing, eyes bursting like grapes. Vex screamed prayers, but they unraveled in his mouth, turning to numbers. And when he finally passed out, it was from silence, not fear. When he awoke, he was outside. The chapel behind him burned, and in his arms, he held the sphere, dead, cold, hollow. Inside it, carved with perfect precision, was a message. You cannot silence what does not speak. We were never yours to kill. By 1870, the United States government could no longer ignore Ravenshade. Too many reports, too many disappearances, too many unnatural photographs leaking from the region. Images where the sun cast no shadows, where faces melted into static, and where, in one deeply classified photograph, four identical boys stood at the edge of a cornfield, but there had been no children present when the shutter clicked. The case was escalated beyond local jurisdiction. Enter Project Nocturne, a covert military intelligence unit created during the Civil War to investigate psycho-spiritual phenomena. Officially disbanded. Unofficially, more active than ever. 4 men were deployed. Codename, Team Indigo. Each soldier had been selected for a very specific reason. None had surviving family. All had undergone psychological conditioning to resist auditory hallucinations. All 4 were trained to enter and forget. That was their mission. Infiltrate Ravenshade. Document the Blackwood estate. Locate the brothers. Eliminate if necessary. They never made it to the house. On day 1, the lead soldier, Corporal Dwyer, reported land distortion. Trees spiraling upward into shapes that defied physics. On day 2, Sergeant Malik claimed time was no longer linear. He'd watched a crow fly backward into its nest and rot midair. But it was day 3 when the true horror began. Their cameras began filming on their own. Footage showed none of them moving, but the house did. The floorboards rearranged. Windows closed and open like blinking eyes. In one shot, a mirror showed the 4 brothers standing behind the soldiers, though none of them had seen anyone in the room. Then one of them disappeared. Private Albrecht. His boots were left behind, still warm. His dog tags melted. And in his bedroll, a single Polaroid, the Blackwood twins as toddlers, playing in what looked like a void. Behind them, something massive, too large to be named, watching. The next night, the remaining soldiers stopped speaking entirely, even to each other. They communicated only through writing, until even that turned into symbols. Spirals, eyes, teeth. On the 7th day, command lost all contact. But then one final photograph arrived. No envelope, no return address, just a photo delivered by hand to a DC intelligence mailbox. It showed all 4 soldiers, standing in front of the Blackwood estate, smiling. But their eyes were not human, and in the background, the manor itself appeared to be breathing. The Ravenshade orphanage was a red-bricked Gothic ruin by the time anyone paid attention to it. Tucked behind the hills near Hollow's Edge, it had stood since 1833, older than the manor, older than the town's founding charter. Built by unknown hands. No blueprints. No record of its funding. Just there, like it had always been. The attic had been sealed since 1859 after 3 caretakers went missing. They said rats, black mold, structural decay, all lies. Because in truth, something had been left up there. Something made by children. In 1871, after the town's final collapse, a team of preservationists, believing the area held historical importance, entered the orphanage to assess the structure. When they broke the attic's rusted lock, they expected dust and ruin. What they found were drawings. Hundreds of them. Stacked, pinned, glued to every wall, every beam, even hanging from strings like ritual flags. Every single drawing was different hands, different techniques, but they all showed the same image. A black tree, always in the center, always with 4 roots. Sometimes the roots were shaped like boys, sometimes like snakes, sometimes like numbers, but always 4, and always bleeding. One corner of the attic had a pile of child-sized shoes, all tagged. None of those names existed in any orphanage record. But the most disturbing thing, not the tree, not the bleeding, it was what came beneath the paper. Because when the team tried to remove the drawings, they discovered that the wood beneath had been carved with the same image, over and over. Burned, cut, even bitten into the beams, as if done with human teeth. Some of the etchings pulsed warm to the touch. Others wept black fluid that smelled like lilacs and copper. And in the center of the attic, scratched in childlike scrawl, was a sentence. We were here before the stairs. That night, 2 of the researchers went missing. The rest fled, but the attic remained, sealed again, hidden, forgotten, until 1924, when a team of Yale researchers attempted to catalog psychographic evidence of mass child hysteria. They found the attic intact, but not the drawings, only the tree, now carved in the ceiling, its roots writhing like veins across the rafters, and a new phrase burned into the center. We are still growing. The dead in Ravenshade never rested long. It was common knowledge among locals that graves didn't stay sealed, not because of vandalism or weather, but because something kept pulling the earth back open. Shovels weren't needed. The soil simply reseeded. In 1883, 3 grave robbers from out of state arrived, hearing rumors that the Blackwood plot held buried treasure. Gold, jewels, artifacts stolen from colonial empires. They didn't care for superstition, only weight and price. They set up camp beside the cemetery wall. Fog swallowed the trees like smoke. Birds avoided the area. Even the wind refused to move. Their target, a grave marked only with a circle of black stones. No name, no date, just a symbol etched in iron. An eye with 4 pupils. They began digging. 4 feet down, the dirt turned black. 6 feet, the smell changed. No rot, no decay, just something sweet like spoiled perfume. At 8 feet, they hit stone. A trapdoor. Ancient. Carved not by hand, but by something that knew geometry the way a butcher knows flesh. They forced it open. Beneath lay a tunnel, lined with ribs. Not stone arches. Ribs, actual, massive, calcified ribs, arching over a path that sloped deep beneath the town. The tunnel pulsed. Literally. The walls contracted slightly, like a throat swallowing slowly. They went in anyway. Torchlight flickered, revealing symbols etched into the walls, all matching the children's drawings from the orphanage attic. Roots. Teeth. That tree again, now carved upside down. One robber, Jones, began speaking in tongues. Not chanting, conversing, responding to a voice only he could hear. He smiled, then screamed, and then bent backward, until his spine snapped in half with a sound like wet rope. The others fled, but the tunnel had changed. It no longer led upward. Instead, it spiraled deeper, leading to a vast underground room. At the center, a pool. Black. Still. Perfect. Floating above it, not touching it, was a small object. A child's shoe, suspended midair, rotating slowly. Beneath it, inside the pool, faces moved. Not reflections, real faces. Pressed just beneath the surface. Smiling. Watching. Then the shoe dropped, and the pool opened. What rose from it could not be described in weight, or shape, or matter. It was absence given form. The 2 men died there, but their journal didn't. It was found years later, wrapped in skin, with the final page written in something that wasn't ink. The brothers don't live above. The house is only their mouth. They live beneath. Miss Adelaide Firth had taught in Ravenshade for nearly 2 decades. A stern, devout woman with sharp eyes and no tolerance for fantasy. Her classroom held only facts, arithmetic, scripture, and the strict hand of order. Until the autumn of 1861. That's when 4 boys appeared. Unenrolled, unaccompanied, no guardians, no documentation. Just walked in mid-lesson. Each boy wore the exact same expression. Not frightened, not mischievous, not curious, just present. She asked their names. They answered in unison. We are Henry. All of them. Same voice. Same rhythm. No variation. Miss Firth, unnerved but unwilling to show weakness, wrote their names in the school's attendance ledger. Henry Blackwood. Henry Blackwood. Henry Blackwood. Henry Blackwood. The next day, she opened the book. The names had changed. Now it read, Bastian Crow, Elijah Crow, Marion Crow, Salem Crow. She assumed a prank. Asked again. This time, they replied, "We are not Henry anymore." Each time she documented their names, the ink would warp. Letters would bleed. Entire pages would curl and blacken. Eventually, the ledger began to resist entirely, its spine cracking, pages tearing if she tried to write their names again. So she began to observe them instead. They never blinked, never coughed, never aged. They answered questions before she asked them. And once, when she caught one boy staring directly into the sun for over an hour, his eyes did not water. He only smiled. Worse still, the other children began to forget them. Even those seated beside them would hesitate when asked who they were. One child, Elizabeth Keene, claimed the four boys spoke inside her sleep, not in dreams, but from beneath the floor of her house. She began drawing the same tree scene in the orphanage attic, whispering that they grow when we forget. Miss Firth tried to remove them from the class. The next day, all four desks were still there, occupied. But now she couldn't describe their faces, only their shadows. She eventually quit, fled Ravenshade, took refuge in a church several towns over, claiming she was cursed, locked herself in the vestry, and began writing a list of every name she remembered. It was found after her death. 47 names. The last four scratched in something deep and red. Not names, just vessels. Father Samuel Crowe had served as the priest of Ravenshade's Methodist Church for over 30 years. But in 1859, everything about his service began to unravel, starting with the bells. It was a crisp autumn morning when the bell ringer, a local farm boy named Peter, climbed to the tower as usual. The clock struck 6, and Peter reached for the rope. The church bell should have tolled, but it didn't. At first, the people assumed the bell had broken. Church services were delayed. Maintenance men came. They found no issues with the bell. Yet, no matter how hard they tried, it would not ring. Father Crowe dismissed the incident, but over time, things became unnatural. The bell remained silent. Then, on the evening of the following Sunday, something happened that even the most cynical men of Ravenshade could not explain. The entire choir vanished. The members, along with their music, disappeared in the middle of a hymn. No one saw them leave. There was no trace of them in the church. No sign of their departure in the town. Just their song. The choir was in perfect unison when they vanished. Voices trembling with the strange, sacred notes of a song no one recognized. Father Crowe attempted to continue leading the service, but the air in the church grew thick, as if the space itself was holding its breath. The people sat in eerie silence, unable to speak, to move. For 2 full hours, no one could utter a word. Father Crowe never spoke of that night again. Instead, he began to write letters. Letters to a higher authority, letters begging for answers for understanding. One such letter was found years later, addressed to the Methodist Diocese of Kansas. They are not ours. They never were. Something claims them. They are becoming like it. I cannot stop them, and I cannot stop myself. It is already too late for all of us. You must come. We need help. The silence in this church is no accident. The bell will never ring again. It cannot. The letter was signed with only his name, and a strange symbol drawn beneath it, a tree with 4 roots. After that, the church ceased to function entirely. The bell tower remained silent. Not only did no one answer Father Crowe's calls, but every attempt to bring new clergy to Ravenshade failed. When the state authorities finally sent inspectors in 1862, they found the church abandoned. Not a single soul inside. Not even a hint of a struggle. The pews were still set, as though someone had just stepped away for a moment, waiting for the return of the bell. But the bell never rang, and Father Crowe's body was found in his quarters, alone. His face contorted in a smile too wide, eyes frozen open, staring straight into the unblinking face of the tree, the one symbol he had left behind. By winter of 1862, only one of the Blackwood brothers was ever seen again, if we can call it seen. His name, if you believe the ledger found in the town archives, was Elijah. But the ink that wrote it had melted halfway through the page, as if the paper itself had rejected the name. He did not walk like other men. He glided, silent as fog, eyes fixed forward. Witnesses say he didn't blink. His coat never moved with the wind, and dogs wouldn't bark near him. They whimpered, rolled over, and pissed themselves. Elijah was last recorded entering Ravenshade Asylum, unaccompanied, just before midnight on December 12th. The staff didn't admit him. He was not a patient. No escort brought him. He simply appeared and walked directly to the lowest floor, the records room. What he did down there no one could fully explain. But what they found after is all that remains of the event. The door to the basement had been welded shut from the inside. The walls were scorched. Every file on the Blackwood family, birth certificates, medical reports, guardianship records, were either burned or had been rewritten in a language no one could identify. Not Latin, not Greek, not any human tongue. On the floor, carved into the linoleum with bare hands, were the words, "Only one of us was ever real." Above it sat Elijah, still, eyes closed, mouth open in a silent scream, his hands resting in his lap. His fingernails were black and split. His skin had begun to flake away. And worst of all, he was breathing, slowly, even after they declared him dead. Dr. Halburn, the asylum's director, took it upon himself to document what followed. Over the next 4 nights, the room grew colder. Lights flickered. The facility's clocks reversed at midnight. But on the 5th night, Elijah spoke. Not with his mouth. Every radio in the building, every gramophone, even the asylum's unused organ, all activated at once. From each came the same voice. "We never chose the tree. The tree chose us. It grew inside our names." Then he opened his eyes. Staff reported blood coming from their ears, some falling unconscious, others claiming they saw the faces of people they had forgotten watching from the walls. The director attempted to move Elijah to a higher security cell, but when he returned with orderlies, the body was gone. All that remained was a circle drawn in ash and 4 words. "We were never brothers." In 1863, under growing pressure from state officials and religious leaders terrified by the silence consuming Ravenshade, the U.S. government authorized a covert operation. Operation Fallroot. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it was spearheaded by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Eddings, a Civil War strategist known for unorthodox field experiments in psychological warfare. He was tasked not with saving Ravenshade, but with understanding it. He brought with him a specialized unit. Linguists, code breakers, weather analysts, spiritualists, and 2 men from a division so classified their names were never recorded. They arrived at dawn, 12 men in total, armed not just with rifles, but measuring devices, phonograph cylinders, chemical analyzers, and relics confiscated from pagan cults across the American South. Within 24 hours, 3 of them had vanished. Not killed, not captured, just gone. Their tents still stood. Uniforms still hung. Boots remained by the fire, untouched. But no footprints led away. No sign of struggle. As if they'd been lifted from reality itself. Eddings ordered the remaining team into the center of the town, the heart of Ravenshade, where the soil split and the roots of the black tree had begun pushing up through the earth. They took readings. Strange electromagnetic pulses bled through their instruments, even though nothing mechanical functioned for long. Compasses spun wildly. Watches reversed. 1 man bled from the gums and wept uncontrollably for 3 hours, speaking in perfect German, though he was an illiterate farm boy from Ohio. That night, Eddings wrote his final report. It never reached Washington. What we have is a carbon copy, archived secretly in 1907 and rediscovered only when the Blackthorn case reopened in the early 2000s. Eddings wrote, "The tree pulses like a heart, but not one born of this world. Time itself shifts here. The air becomes heavier the longer we remain. These are not 4 boys. They were fragments, split from something older, something that wears memory like skin." He ended the report with a phrase underlined in red. "No one must return. Ravenshade is no longer American soil. It belongs to the tree." The next morning, when reinforcements arrived from Fort Wallace, they found nothing. Not a single man. Not even Eddings. Just a blackened circle in the center of town. And in the middle, for small pairs of boots. Children's boots, laid side by side, facing east, as if waiting for sunrise. In 1897, Decades after the government's failed Operation Fallroot, a frail woman walked into the offices of the Ravenshade Historical Preservation Society. Her name was Clara Denton, a former resident, one of the last surviving children of the original town. She was 49 years old, but looked much older. Skin like parchment, voice hollow. Her eyes never fully opened, as if what she had seen still lived behind them, clawing at her from the inside. She carried a single item, a cloth-wrapped bundle the size of a child's head. The archivist on duty, Margaret Lynn, described her arrival in a personal journal. She said she had to return the heart, that it was never hers to keep, that if she died before sunrise, the tree would grow again. When asked what she meant, Clara told her story. She remembered the 4 Blackwood boys, but not as brothers. Not even as human. She said they lived in the woods behind the Denton farm, not in a house, but in the roots of a massive tree with bark darker than coal. The boys never aged. They didn't speak, but they sang, not with mouths, but with something beneath the soil, a sound that lived underneath her dreams. One autumn evening in 1861, Clara's parents disappeared after visiting the boys. No one believed her when she said the brothers had called her mother by name, a name no one else knew, and offered her a gift, a smooth, warm stone shaped like a seed. Clara took the seed that night and hid it under her bed. The next morning, her hair had turned white, and the voices had begun. She would hear them whispering beneath the floorboards, beneath the well, beneath the roots of the trees. Always 4 voices, always repeating the same phrase. Only one of us remembers. But we all must feed. Clara fled, Ravenshade days later. She never returned. Until that day in 1897. Inside her cloth bundle, preserved for over 30 years, was the same stone. Still warm, still pulsing faintly. She begged Margaret to destroy it, to bury it in salt and ash, as the old Appalachian witches once did. But before she could explain further, Clara collapsed. She died moments later in the chair. Autopsy reports claim her heart had split, not torn, but divided into 4 perfect pieces, still beating, each piece pulsing to a different rhythm. No one could explain how. The seed was never found again. The final piece of the mystery came not from a grave, a record, or a witness. It came from the soil itself. In 2003, an unmarked excavation project began near the old Ravenshade site. Quiet, underfunded, led by an independent team of historians and geophysicists. The land had long been condemned, but local legends spoke of something buried there, a place where the forest forgot to grow. What they unearthed was not a building, not even ruins, but a structure of roots. Vast, gnarled tendrils, hardened like bone, shaped into walls and corridors, beneath the earth where the Blackwood house once stood. At its center, they found 4 depressions in the ground, just wide enough for children to lie in. Around them, thousands of scratches, glyphs, not in any known language, but pulsing with patterns that mirrored brainwave activity. A frequency of thought. Carved in the dirt were 4 words. We were never born. Then came the storm. Wind with no source. Lightning without clouds. Equipment fried. One researcher went blind. Another spoke for 3 hours in a voice that wasn't hers, saying the same thing again and again. We are not brothers. We are the memory of something that died screaming. When the recordings from that night were later analyzed, they discovered something that broke every mind in the room. The voice patterns, the tone, pacing, and cadence matched those of children recorded in 1912, 1946, 1979, and again in 1994. 4 voices, always different names, always different towns, but the same sentences, the same words, the same impossible message. 1 remembers, 3 obey. The conclusion? There were never 4 boys. There was one entity, fragmented across time, anchoring itself through host bodies. Always children, always found near large trees, always disappearing after a storm. The Blackwood brothers were not victims. They were seeds, carriers of a memory too old for science, too dangerous for faith, and too aware to die. The black tree still grows in places where no birds sing. It feeds on forgotten names. It blooms when no one is watching. It speaks in dreams, through stories, through children who come home with new voices. And if you've made it this far, then perhaps you've already heard it. Perhaps you dreamt of the four brothers, but only one of them ever looked you in the eye. And now that you've remembered, it remembers you. If you made it to the end of this story, comment below. I only remember one. And don't forget to subscribe to Dead Scroll, where the stories they buried are the ones we dig up. Because the truth isn't lost. It's just waiting. Underneath. Always underneath.